But before we go into these myths, I'd like to ask you another question, if I may. Imagine that you were struggling with life a bit, and had been for quite a while, and you were then diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. What are some of the thoughts that would run through your head? Maybe they'd look something like this. So I want to just turn to some of those myths that we discovered during the course of our work. Myth number 1, post. The term post, linked with traumatic stress in this particular case, the term post implies that it's always a past event that detrimentally affects us and then leads to disruptive behaviours in our present and then carrying on into the future. But we very soon, as I'm sure lots of you have questioned this word post. Because in the people that were coming to us seeking our support, they were continually in the line of fire. They continually had that threat there, that potential that could arise in a traumatic situation at any time in the course of their working day. And that continuous element, that continuous threat, could be equally as disruptive as any kind of past trauma. Myth number 2, disorder. The term disorder implies that there's an affliction and leads those around you and yourself to think that there's something wrong with you. Well, we discovered that actually research, which has grown quite rapidly in recent years, shows and implies that for many, a medical testing and medical diagnosis can actually, rather than be reassuring, can actually cause further distress and further anxiety. And this can lead to what has been termed illness perceptions. And illness perceptions play a dramatic part in the approaches, in the outcomes, and in the recoveries for an individual. And those illness perceptions can get in the way, especially if help is not immediately forthcoming, if there's a delay in getting the help that's needed. That can become more and more entrenched, and the fear that builds up around these illness perceptions can stop people from actually functioning. Of course, another problem with the term disorder, especially in post-traumatic stress disorder, is the fact that it's surrounded with this social stigma. And this is a real problem. We've had lots of the emergency service workers coming to us saying that they feel labelled as a bad apple. They feel labelled as somebody who can't be trusted anymore, labelled as somebody who isn't competent to do their job anymore. And of course, the really big problem about this is this fear of labelling actually stops so many from coming forward in the first place to ask for the help they so desperately need. It leads me on to myth number 3, because another problem with the word disorder is that it implies for the individual and also those that they go to seek for help and support, that in actual fact they can only manage it. They can never actually fully recover from it. Therapy up to now has very much been around managing, coping, learning to live with in a reactive way. Think post-wars, think 9/11, think Manchester bombings. However, we believe that you can recover fully from PTSD. You can live a liberated life. You can go from survive to thrive to fully alive. And that is the result that we seek to achieve with every single person that comes to us for support. So that leads me into what we think is a little bit of a groundbreaking approach to the area of stress and trauma. And it necessitates a change in perceptions. So we kept coming across again and again this problem of within those that we dealt, especially during our work with the Southwest Police Constabulary, again and again, 50% of those that came to us had serious symptoms of PTSD. And we found that when we were doing sessions with them, the myths of post and disorder kept getting in the way, not just from that external stigma around it, but what was in the individual themselves that stopped us from being able to get the results that we knew we could get. And that led us to questioning what we could do about this. And that question, in fact, led us to carrying out our first FAST research. EFT within the police force, and a little bit more about EFT later, funded by the Aleph Trust and conducted by university researcher and clinician Sunita Patani, who's actually joined us here this morning. And the results that we got and the findings that we had were remarkable. We discovered that for therapy and sessions to be successful, we had to move beyond that past incidents, those past memories that were used in a reactive way. Usually, they could help us deal with the symptoms, very often not until those symptoms had become chronic when someone actually approached us. And of course, there is a definite place for that. But we found to be really successful, it relied on us working proactively, approaching with the client in the present those future potentials, or we could say inevitabilities, of future trauma turning up in the course of their working day, as was the nature in the emergency services work. So to reflect this, we made a couple of changes. We changed the P for post into C for continuous. Obvious, really. We also changed the detrimental and the stigma disorder into the much more natural and normal R for responses. Continuous traumatic stress responses. What a simple change, but what an enormous difference that made. When we started using that term or bringing it into our sessions, it showed so simply the difference in the attitudes and perceptions of those we were helping. Especially the term responses made sense. When our practitioners explained a little bit about the neurobiology around responses, they could relate to it and they could accept much more readily why they were feeling. Perfectly normal response. So that was a very small change there, but what actually happened that we saw that they moved from a kind of resignation to real hope, and that made a really ongoing difference to the enthusiasm and the confidence that they came to with their sessions. They expected recovery, a little bit like that they would from a physical injury. And it also stimulated a willingness for them to look at building up this future resilience with the methods that we were using that they could trust worked. So that was a really good thing for us. It was amazing what just those small differences could make, and it blew us away.